Hello friends, welcome to a Chabura public shiur. Tonight we will be exploring making berachot on Minhagim and in specific Ner Chanukah and a Bet Knesset. Tonight we have for the first time Rabbi Yossi Azose, and we're very excited to have him. About our speaker, Rabbi Yossi Azose, born and raised in Seattle's Sephardic community, now leads congregation on Sheh Shalom in West Hempstead, New York. He has taught at various institutions, including Rambam Mesivta and the Northwest Yeshiva High School, and serves as HR Director for Superior Healthcare Management. Rabbi Azose received Minhag in 1995 from Rabbi Israel Chayat and lives with his wife, Judy, and their 5 children. I'll also point out that Rabbi Azose's chapter in our Yamim Noraim book received lots of praise, and we thank him for contributing. With that said, thank you so much to all who are here live and to all of our members who are going to be listening afterwards. And Rabbi Azose, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ohad, and thank you to the Chabura for the opportunity. It's a real privilege for me to present tonight, and just wanted. Am I coming in okay? By the way, could everybody hear me? Okay, great.
Yes, perfect.
It's a little quiet.
Great. Quiet?
Mm-hmm.
It could be by you, Simon.
How is it now?
It's good.
It's good. Okay. Okay. So this evening I wanted to present what I thought was an interesting topic. Kind of dovetails into a more broader topic. The exploring the minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah in the synagogue. I'll give a little bit of a brief background of it, but it sort of dovetails into a broader question of making a blessing, making a Berakha on a minhag, and the questions that surround specifically the minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and share my screen. Do share. Okay, so can everybody see my screen? Okay.
Not yet.
Second. Not yet. Okay, just a second. Here.
We can see.
Okay, coming in now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Ner Chanukah and the Bet Knesset, I'll just, before I start, I just want to share a little bit about myself. Most of you don't know me. My name is Rabbi Yossi Azose. As Ohad introduced, I was born in Seattle, Washington, in the Sephardic community of Seattle, Washington. The Sephardic community in Seattle started really around the turn of the 20th century from immigrants of Sephardim from Turkey and also from Greece, and more specifically from the island of Rhodes. So two distinct kehilot emerged from those immigrants. One was a Turkish kehillah and one was a Greek kehillah. My background is Turkish. My father was actually born in Seattle, but his parents came from Turkey. And somewhere along the way, my father, because he had a good voice, so the Greek kehillah asked him to become their chazan, which he did for a number of decades. So I actually grew up in the Greek kehillah, even though my background is Turkish. But that's part of the Seattle, a little description of the Seattle Sephardic community. In 1988, I graduated high school and then came east to New York to study at Yeshiva B'nai Torah in Far Rockaway, New York, under the guidance of Rabbi Israel Chait, and I received semicha there in 1995. I then went into chinuch, taught in various different schools and organizations, and currently I'm not in Chinuch right now. I work in the real world, as they say, as a human resources director for a nursing home operator. But along with that, I also serve as a spiritual leader for the Sephardic Minyan of Congregation Anshe Shalom in West Hempstead, New York. Now, with respect to the minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset, the reason why I find it so interesting is because when you try to trace back the origin of the minhag, so there's a very large corpus of information of halachot that deal with Hilchot Chanukah dating back to the time of the Gemara, the whole section of the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat that deals with these halachot. But throughout that entire section, you won't find anything that addresses making lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. So evidently, it's something that did not take place in the time of the Gemara. There are no sources that talk about it among the Geonim as well. So there's radio silence with respect to lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. The Rambam, who's very, very comprehensive, as I'm sure we all know, in his Mishneh Torah, his magnum opus, where he basically covers all aspects of halakha, says nothing about lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. So for all intents and purposes, the evidence that we have is that really the minhag did not exist. Dating back at least to the time of the Rambam. So where is the first source that talks about the minhag to light Ner Chanukah? So the first source, and I'll go to the next
Rabbi,
slide.
can you make it into presenter mode?
Presentation? Yes, I'll try and give you a presentation. Okay, how's that? Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So the first source that actually mentions the minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset is Rabbi Yitzchak Abamari, who lived in Marseille in the 12th century. And he wrote a sefer called Sefer HaItur. And before we get to the Sefer HaItur and what he says, basically the Gemara in its pure form, we have an obligation to light Ner Chanukah. I mean, we kind of take these things for granted, but it's good to know where they come from. So the Gemara tells us that basically we have an obligation to light Ner Chanukah for 8 days. We all know the story of why we're obligated to light the Chanukah candles. But the Gemara is very succinct and very specific that the halakha applies to what's described as ner ish ubeto. Ner ish ubeto means that in order to be obligated in lighting Ner Chanukah, it's based on the house. Basically, you have to live in a domicile, some sort of dwelling. If you have a person who's homeless, and the Gemara discusses this situation, you have a homeless person who bounces from place to place. He lives on the streets, let's say. So such a person would simply be exempt from lighting Ner Chanukah. We know that the Gemara says that aniyim, the people who are extremely poor, have to do whatever they can. They have to sell the shirt off their back in order to buy oil or candles in order to light Ner Chanukah. But if a person is so destitute that he doesn't even have a home where which to light Ner Chanukah, he's simply exempt from lighting. So that's the halakha in its pure form of Ner Chanukah. Ner ishu beto. It's based on the home. So as I described in the introductory remarks, not only is there no indication of the minhag to light in the Bet Knesset, there's also sort of evidence to say that it shouldn't be done. Because why? Because you're not really fulfilling the halakha according to the way it was constructed. It was constructed such that you need a home in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So now let's get to the Sefer HaYitur and what he says here. Basically, if you look at the highlighted section, and I highlighted the main section, but I wanted to read a little bit before that, where he says Tanu Rabbanan. He says Ner Chanukah mitzvah le'anicha al petach beto mibachutz. So there's an obligation to place the Chanukah candles at his house towards the outside, mibachutz. Let's say towards the window, or let's say the doorway of his house, so that it's displayed towards people on the outside. If he lives on a high rise, so then he should place it in the window near the street. Now he says as follows: says, but if a person lives during a time of danger, manichal shulchano vedayo. So this quote from the Sefer HaYitur is actually a quote from the Gemara. The Yitur is actually quoting verbatim from the Gemara. The Gemara also addressed a situation where a person is living in a time of sakana. Sakana is a time of danger. What does danger mean? Danger means that it's dangerous to light Chanukah candles and display it outwardly, on the outside, towards the street, towards the public. That would be a dangerous thing. So the Gemara says that if a person lives in such a situation, sha'at sakana, so then what does he do? There's obviously a directive with respect to the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. I mean, the whole purpose of Ner Chanukah is to publicize the miracle that happened during the time of Chanukah. It's a concept called Pirsumei Nisa. And if a person cannot fulfill Pirsumei Nisa, I mean, basically publicizing the miracle, because it's too dangerous to do that, so what does he do? So the Gemara says what he should do then is place the Ner Chanukah on his table inside his house. Vedayo means, and saying that's enough. That's enough of a fulfillment in order to satisfy the requirement of Pirsumei Nisa, of publicizing the miracle. Who's he publicizing to? He's publicizing to the remaining members of his household. That's also a limited degree of publicizing the miracle, even though everybody in the household knows about the miracle and they know what happened. Nevertheless, it's still considered a publicizing of the miracle. If you're publicizing to somebody who knows about it, you're just giving added publicity to the miracle. So that's enough of a Pirsumei Nisa in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Manichal shulchano vedayo. So in the time of the Gemara, if there was a time of danger, so all the person needed to do was basically go inside his house, to his kitchen table or whatever have you, place the Ner Chanukah there, and that would fulfill the mitzvah. Now, if you look at the highlighted part of the Sefer HaYitur, and this is really his innovation, the first time that we see any mention of this custom to light Ner Chanukah on the Bet Knesset, says as follows: V'nahagu lehadlik Ner Chanukah beBet Knesset. Says, and they were accustomed. There was a custom to light Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. And some Girsaot actually add in say that v'yesh bekomot shenahagu al petach v'yesh shemanichim beBet Knesset be'emtza. So in his time, in the time of the Sefer HaYitur, there were two different customs with respect to lighting in the Bet Knesset. One was where it was in the Bet Knesset, but again, it was outward toward the doorway of the Bet Knesset. So then again, there would be publicity toward the outside. But then there were also some minhagim where they actually lit the Ner Chanukah inside the Bet Knesset. So I'm pointing this out to you, and again, this is the first source that we see for the minhag of lighting ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. So, if one were to ask you about the Sefer Torah, so what was the impetus for this minhag to take hold? Why did this minhag come about? So I would suggest that it seems from Sefer Torah, from the fact just the way that the paragraph flows, is that the minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset started out. It was born from the issue or the problem of sakana, because he couples the minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset with also the statement in the Gemara of Sha'at Sakana. So it stands to reason that really that there was a sakana that existed in the time of the Sefer HaYitur. The Sefer HaYitur lived in southern France, in Marseille, in the 12th century. So, I mean, you had some, the Jews, certainly many Jews lived in southern France at the time. I would say that maybe there's mild cases of anti-Semitism there, of persecution. And as a result of that, so he says that the minhag came about that they decided to start lighting the ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. So before we continue, I guess we could ask the question. I mean, I think it's fair to ask that if the response to Shat Sakana, the response to to having a time of danger in the time of the Sefer HaYitur for Yitzchak Abamari was to say, okay, well, if we can't light on the outside of our homes, so probably we should light inside our homes. I mean, that's not going to be a dangerous thing because people aren't really going to see what's happening inside your home. But in addition to that, aside from lighting inside your home, where the Gemara kind of stopped at that point, in addition to that, we should also light in the Bet Knesset. If that was really the response of the rabbinate, or let's say the Jews, in early medieval southern France, so why was that the response then? But yet the Gemara, if you look at the Gemara's response was, what did the Gemara say? Manicha, that you place it al shulchano v'dayo. What's the response to Shat Sakana? Place it on your kitchen table, vidayo, and that's enough. You don't need to go any further. So why is it? I mean, if you're contrasting the response to Shat Sakana at the time of the Gemara, is very different than the response to Shat Sakana in the time of the Sefer HaYitur. So why did that happen? Why was there an impetus in the time of the Sefer HaYitur altogether to start lighting in the Bet Knesset? So if anybody, by the way, wants to, stop me at any point and ask any questions or offer suggestions, by all means, I'm happy to field any comments or questions. But I guess that's the question that I would ask kind of off the bat before we continue. And perhaps maybe make a suggestion here that there was a difference between the time of the Gemara and the time of the Sefer HaYitur. What was the difference? The difference is that, and this is my own suggestion, I didn't really see this anywhere else, make this suggestion, that in the time of the Gemara, you still had a very centralized rabbinate, a very centralized rabbinic authority. You still had the offices of the Nasi and the Resh Galuta, so you had centralized authority. So when the Gemara talked about Sha'at Sakana, let's say like a time or place of danger, so they weren't talking about like across the spectrum of the Jewish world at the time. There were pockets of places that were dangerous to light ner Chanukah at the window of your home towards the outside, because non-Jews would see it, and then basically they would cause trouble. So the rabbinate at the time of the Gemara didn't feel the need to make a blanket minhag, to basically just make a universal minhag, to say that in response to sakana, we're going to make a universal minhag to start lighting in the Bet Knesset. Why? Again, because it was a matter of just dealing with like pockets of anti-Semitism, pockets of danger that occurred. And that, so therefore the rabbis at the time of the Gemara didn't feel that was a proper response. However, in the time of the Sefer Tour, in early medieval France, let's say, it's a much different situation. It's true that you had many different communities living in different locations, some of which may have been safer than others. But, however, you did not have a centralized authority. Every rabbi basically was the authority, or every community basically had the authority of their rabbis. And sometimes you had had certain communities that looked to large figures that lived in proximity, and they deferred to those authorities. But by and large, you didn't have one centralized authority, and for that reason, the rabbis of individual communities were the ones that created this minhag, because they knew, let's say, in one individual community, that there was a blanket sakana for my community. And therefore, because of this blanket sakana, rather than just relying on people lighting in their own homes, we're going to create a minhag. We're going to start a minhag to have the communities light in the kehilot, in the synagogues, so that it would augment the pirsumei nisa. It would actually allow us to have a greater publicity of the miracle than if we just relied on people lighting, in the midst of their homes, so that it was just a pirsumei nisa for, people in their individual homes. So that's what I would say in answer to the question of why the minhag only started really at the time of the Sefer HaItur. That's really what gave the genesis for the minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset. So that's my own personal suggestion. Okay, so that's the 12th century in southern France. Fast forward basically another 100 years. Basically, Yitzhak Abba Mari, who lived in Marseille, southern France. About 50 to 100 years later, basically, then you have a number of other Rishonim that start talking about this minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset. Rabbi Meir Rottenberg, who was born in Worms in Germany. So he also mentions it. He lived about 75 years after Rav Yitzhak Abba Mari. So you have this minhag that started spreading from southern France towards the Jewish communities in Germany. As well, you also had a spread that went southward into Spain. Rav Yom Tov ben al-Asavili, more commonly known as the Ritva, also mentions he also lived about 50 to 75 years after Yitzchak Abba Mari, maybe 100 years, let's say, and he mentions it as well. So all of a sudden you start seeing this spread of this minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset in the medieval Jewish community of Europe. Okay, so that's basically how it started spreading, and from there, you really get to the situation where nowadays basically the minhag is totally ubiquitous. I mean, it's really like every community that follows halakha, has this minhag of lighting ner Chanukah in the synagogue. So that's basically what exactly happened. What I wanted to, okay, so this next slide is the source in the Gemara, which I think we really covered, where the Gemara says in the second parak in Shabbat, he says, "Mitzvah la'anichal petach beto mi'achutz Ubishat sakana menichal shulchano v'dayo. That's really, the Sefer Aitur quoted verbatim from the Gemara there. And so up until this point, basically, where our position is that the minhag really started from, it was born out of a situation of sakana. It was it was dangerous in certain places, and therefore that's why that's why the minhag developed. Okay, that's one reason for the minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset. There are a couple other reasons, which I want to get to, but each one of the other reasons also has its flaws, and I'll explain. This is a page from the tour, the Arba Turim of Yaakov ben Asher. So he lived in the mid 13th, 14th century in Toledo, Spain. He was the son of Rabbeinu Asher, the famous Rabbeinu Asher, who fled Germany and made his way to Spain, to Toledo in Spain. And because of his greatness, because he was such a great rabbi, the people of Toledo basically made him their rabbinic authority. He became the rabbi par excellence in Toledo. So Yaakov ben Asher, he's the son, and he wrote basically the precursor, what I would say, the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch. He was the one that ordered the Shulchan Aruch in the sections that we have now, the what's called the Arba Turim, the four different sections of the Shulchan Aruch, and basically what he says is, he says, "Ubebet Knesset manicha bedorom zecher lemenorah shehayita bedorom." Okay, so he suggests another answer for the minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset. He kind of hints to it, but there are Rishonim that actually spell this out a little bit more clearly. He says that in the Bet Knesset, so where are we supposed to place the menorah? We saw that the Sefer Aitur suggested two places. One was two minhagim. One was in the window of the Bet Knesset. The other one was inside the Bet Knesset. So if you're going to place it inside the Bet Knesset, so where do you do it? So he says, well, what you should do is you place it on the southern wall, on the south wall. Why should you place it on the south wall? So he says, Zecher lemenorah shehayita bedarom. So he suggests that the Ner Chanukah is reminiscent. It's a zecher. It's a remembrance of the menorah that existed in the time of the Bet Midrash. When the Bet Midrash stood, so one of the kelim, one of the vessels of the Bet Midrash, of course, is the Menorat HaZahav. There's a golden menorah that was in the Kodesh. And where was it placed in the Kodesh? It was placed on the southern wall. So he's saying, just like the menorah in the Bet Midrash was placed on the southern wall, so too in the Bet Knesset, which we call a Bet Midrash Me'at, like a Bet Midrash in miniature. So what we should do is we should try to recreate that scene and light the Ner Chanukah and place it on the southern wall of the Bet Knesset. So this suggests really another reason for the lighting of the menorah in the Bet Knesset. As I said before, there are other Rishonim that actually spell this out, that the reason for the minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset is to recreate what was done in the Bet HaMikdash. That just like in the Bet HaMikdash, they lit the menorah, and they lit the menorah every single day, by the way. So when they lit the menorah, so just like they lit the menorah in the Bet HaMikdash on the southern wall, so we're going to light Ner Chanukah on the southern wall as a remembrance to the Bet HaMikdash. And I mean, there are many halachot that we fulfill today, really as a zecher lamikdash, basically as a remembrance for the Bet HaMikdash. When the Jews suffered the destruction of the Second Temple, it was such a traumatic event in Jewish history that it completely overturned our sense of being, even of self, to the point where many halachot were kind of reworked to now include the zecher lamikdash. So basically, we should not forget that the halachot that we fulfilled at the time of the Bet Mikdash were centered around the Bet Mikdash. It was so different than what we have now. And nowadays, we're without the Bet Mikdash, we're suffering from such a void that we need some things to now insert into our halachic day-to-day living that reminds us of the Bet Mikdash. And there are numerous examples. I don't have to go through all of them, but the suggestion is that this is one of the examples: lighting Ner Chanukah on the Bet Knesset and placing it on the southern wall. The problem with this suggestion is that if that's really true, I mean, usually with a Zecher LaMikdash, with things that are set up by the rabbis as a commemoration of the Bet Mikdash, we usually see it as set up almost immediately after, really, or maybe let's say like in the ensuing years after the destruction of the temple. So they set up a Zecher LaMikdash. So as an example, basically we have on the Seder night, we have a mitzvah of eating matzah. We have to eat matzah. We also have to eat maror. There's no independent obligation to eat maror from the Torah, because anything that's mentioned in the Torah with respect to eating maror is only mentioned. It's mentioned twice in the Torah, but it's only mentioned in context of eating it together with the meat of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal sacrifice. But nowadays we still eat maror. We eat maror independently. So the eating of the maror in and of itself really is, in a sense, really a kind of like a zecher to the Bet Mikdash. In addition to that, you have, as we all know in our Seder, we have basically what's called what we colloquially call the Hillel sandwich. The Hillel sandwich is basically we put the matzah and maror together and we eat it together. Why do we have this? Put the matzah and the maror together? It's Zecher LaMikdash, and many of us are actually accustomed, before we eat the sandwich, we actually make the statement Zecher LaMikdash Ke Hillel Hazaken. It's a commemoration of the Bet Mikdash according to Hillel Hazaken. He would put, what they used to do is put all the matzah and the maror and the meat of the Korban Pesach together and then eat it, because it says al matzot u'b'reim yochaluhu. But that's an example of a Zecher LaMikdash that occurred almost right away in the ensuing years after our loss of the Bet Mikdash. If indeed the minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset is a Zecher LaMikdash, so wouldn't we see this minhag really dated much older? Why is it that we're seeing this minhag all of a sudden pop up in the 12th century in Europe? It doesn't seem like a Zecher LaMikdash could be commemorated in that way. I mean, the Zecher LaMikdash were really generated by the rabbis that lived after the time of the Bet Mikdash. I mean, just for me today to go ahead and say all of a sudden I'm gonna decide that I'm gonna make a Zecher LaMikdash, even though it's hundreds, now unfortunately thousands of years after the destruction of the Bet Mikdash, I can't just simply generate my own minhag like that. That's not how minhagim work. So it wouldn't seem that that if that's really truly the reason for lighting the Ner Chanukah on the Bet Knesset, that's really how how it worked out. So that's really the problem with that reason for Ner Chanukah on the Bet Knesset. Okay, next to the tour, on the side of the tour is a commentary called Bet Yosef. Bet Yosef was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. So we name him Maran. He's the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So aside from authoring the Shulchan Aruch, he wrote a commentary on the tour, which was really kind of like the background to his rulings in the Shulchan Aruch. If you ever want to know how Maran arrived at the rulings in the Shulchan Aruch, so you have to look at the Bet Yosef. In Bet Yosef, he gives the explanations for how he arrived at those rulings. And the Bet Yosef quotes, he gives actually a third reason for the minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah on the Bet Knesset. And this reason comes from the Kolbo. Kolbo was a sefer that was printed first in 1490. It was unknown. It was a sefer of unknown authorship. However, most scholars, I think today, believe that it was written by Rav Aharon HaKohen of Lunel in the 13th century. So he's kind of like an early Rishon. So he wrote sefer called Bo. So if that's really the case, Rav Aharon HaKohen of Lunel also wrote a more famous sefer called Orchot Chaim. So Kolbo was kind of a companion to the Orchot Chaim. In any case, so Bet Yosef says his nearest shetiknu ken mipnei haorchim she'en lahem bayit lahadlik bo. וכמו שתקנו קידוש בבית הכנסת משום אורחים, תאכלו ושתו בבית כנשתה. Okay, so he gives a third reason. The third reason is, he says, the reason why we light in the Bet Knesset is because the Bet Knesset, over the years, has served also kind of like as a stopover, as an inn for travelers, for guests in certain communities. They had no place to stay, so they stayed in the Bet Knesset. They actually they slept there and they ate there in the Bet Knesset. So if you have guests that are sleeping and eating in the Bet Knesset, so as we know, you have the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, Ner Ishu Beto, that has to have in order to fulfill the obligation of the mitzvah, you have to have a bayit, a house. So for these guests, their de facto house was the Bet Knesset, because that's where they stayed. Well, that's where they slept. That's where they ate while they were traveling, while they were visiting the various communities. And for the benefit of these people, possibly because they're traveling, they didn't have the ability to obtain their own nerot, or they weren't able to do it, wherever they were staying in the Bet Knesset. So basically, the Minhag developed that, okay, so for the benefit of these people, we're going to have a general lighting of Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset for the benefit of these people. And he gives an example of a similar halakha that we similarly accommodated the travelers who stayed in the Bet Knesset, namely Kiddush in the Bet Knesset. So, and this, by the way, is a much older minhag. It's actually mentioned in the Gemara. Making Kiddush, let's say people go to the Bet Knesset on Friday night, they pray Minhag, they pray Arvit. Arvit is over, and now you're going to have people that are going to remain in the Bet Knesset because they're staying there, they're sleeping there. So the minhag developed that basically that the sexton or the chazan or the rabbi, whoever it was, one of the leaders of the Bet Knesset would make kiddush for their benefit. Basically, so they would make kiddush at the Bet Knesset, and because there were the people that actually stayed in the Bet Knesset, so it would benefit those people so that they could actually hear kiddush, they could have wine and hear kiddush during their stay. So just like with that halakha, we see that there was an accommodation made so that now we make kiddush in the Bet Knesset for the benefit of the orchim. So too, they started a minhag to light Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset for the benefit of the orchim. So it's such that even if in a situation where the actual impetus for the minhag drops off, suppose you really don't have, like on a given week, you don't have guests staying in the Bet Knesset. Nevertheless, because of the minhag, because you want to maintain the minhag, you want it to retain a certain amount of consistency. So we're gonna keep in place the minhag of making kiddush in the Bet Knesset, as well as lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset, even in situations where there are no orchim, there are no guests. And he says, "V'chein katav kolbo." The kolbo actually says this as well. So that's the third reason. Now, with this third reason, again, it's subject to a lot of criticism. The Shibbolei Haleket was another Rishon, doesn't like this answer at all, because he says that Miman Avshach. It means it's one or the other. If you have guests in the Bet Knesset and they're staying there, that's their bite, then of course they're obligated to light. Because they're Ishu Beto, so they would have to light. If you were a guest in someone's house, so there's a provision which is called an achsanai. You're a guest, and what you could do is you could actually pay the host a certain amount of money in order to take a share of the oil or the candles that the host is lighting in, so that he could fulfill his mitzvah through his lighting for you. If it's not the case, let's say you're staying in a place where you have your own room, and you don't have a host to pay the money, so then you're obligated to light on your own. I mean, then just like anybody else that has has a home, so too you have to light. So if that's the case, if you have orchim in the Bet Knesset and they're staying in the synagogue, so they have their own personal obligation to light. That doesn't mean to say that we have to create this universal minhag for all Batei Knesiot to light at all times. That doesn't make any sense. And if in fact there are no orchim, so then there's no impetus to light at all. So the Shibbolei Haleket doesn't like this reason at all. So for those the two aforementioned reasons, let's leave those aside. The Bet Yosef gives one more reason, which I'd like to focus on. It also comes to the kolbo, and he says as follows: his katav od acher, tam acher. He gives another reason. Shu kedei lefarsem hanes mifnei kol ha'am u'lesader berachot lifnehem. Sheyesh beze pirsum gadol laHashem yitbarach vekidush shemo keshemevarchim oto b'makelot. To give another reason, he says, why do we light in the Bet Knesset? It's in order to publicize the miracle before the entire assembly, and in order to order the berachot in front of them. Why? Because by doing so, there is a great publicity of the nes of the miracle to Hashem. Oops, go back here. And a sanctification of his name when we bless in a multitude. So that's another reason the kolbo gives, which is very interesting. What I'd like to do is, in the next slide, there's the actual language of the kolbo. What the Bet Yosef here is doing is actually just paraphrasing the kolbo. But the kolbo himself doesn't really say that. He actually gives a little bit of a different reason, but in his different reason, I think it's an interesting study when you go back to the Bet Yosef and try to understand how the Bet Yosef is reading into the kolbo. Because if you actually look at the original language of the kolbo, he says as follows: "His nahagu kol mekomot lehalik ner Chanukah vet Knesset." So very interestingly, by the way, if you listen to his language, he says, and all places, meaning to say that by the time of the kolbo, we're talking about the 13th century in Lunel, that's in Provence, all places, basically all communities that he knows about, were accustomed to light ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. It wasn't a matter of, oh, well, some communities caught on, others didn't. By his time, it became completely widespread to light in the Bet Knesset. Why? Lehotzi mi she'enu baki. He says, in order to fulfill the obligation of those who are not expert, she'enu zariz bezot, and are not, zealous with respect to the mitzvah of lighting ner Chanukah. So very interesting reason. It seems a little bit different than what Bet Yosef is saying that really that according to kolbo, there were people that were, let's say, ignorant in how to fulfill the mitzvah of ner Chanukah. They didn't know how to do it. So in order to fulfill their obligation, so they instituted a minhag to light in the Bet Knesset so that they could fulfill their obligation through the lighting in the Bet Knesset. Very interesting. Yeah, and he adds in, he throws in, he says, Gam ki hu hidur ha-mitzvah. It's a beautification of the mitzvah, pirsum hanes, v'zecher lamikdash, kind of like a potpourri of some of the answers we saw before. It's a pirsum hanes, and also it's a commemoration of the mikdash, almost kind of like as a throw-in to what he was saying originally. But really, his ikar, his essential reason, was to fulfill the obligation of those who couldn't really do it on their own. He doesn't really mention sakana as a reason. His reason is that basically you're going to have people that don't really know how to fulfill the mitzvah, and therefore, since they don't know how to fulfill the mitzvah, the best thing to do is to have a communal lighting in the Bet Knesset, and have in mind that for anybody who's there, that they can also fulfill their obligation. Bet Yosef, by the way, we'll get back to the Bet Yosef if we have time. Bet Yosef really kind of has a yeah.
It seems a very strange statement because it doesn't align to the precept that we learned from the Gemara, which is Neru Ishu Beitur. So these ignorant people for whom we are lighting, we're not lighting in their homes. So we haven't met the basic constraints or the features of the halacha by doing it in the Beit Knesset. So one might assume that it doesn't work, that we fulfill their obligation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's an excellent question. I don't really know how to answer that question in the Kolbo. I know that that there's some Rishonim, like the Rivash, for example, or Yitzhak Bar Sheshet, that goes out of his way to say that even though yes, of course, there's a minhag to light in the Bet Knesset, but nobody should think that they're actually fulfilling their obligation from the Bet Knesset lighting, and that's what we follow the halacha. Nobody fulfills their obligation, even if they're completely ignorant of how to fulfill the mitzvah. Lighting in the Bet Knesset is not going to help them, because as you pointed out, I mean, the basic mitzvah is ner ishu beto, and therefore, so too bad. I mean, basically lighting nerot Chanukah is in the Bet Knesset is not going to help them. What I think we can do, if we go back, might as well do it now, to the Bet Yosef, maybe see what he's trying to say or how he's trying to learn the Kolbo. Maybe he has a little bit of a different take. He says as follows. One second. Let me go back. Look what he says. He says to order the berachot before them. So what that tells me is not that he's reading the Kolbo to say that the Chazan or the Shamash is going to light Ner Chanukah and Bet Knesset to fulfill the obligation of those who are ignorant. What he's trying to say is that they don't know how to say the Berakha. So what should they do? Well, go to the Bet Knesset, and there's going to be a lighting in the Bet Knesset, and they're going to say exactly how the Berachot are supposed to, how the lighting is supposed to take place, and how the Berachot are supposed to be recited. Pay close attention to that. Once you have that information, now you can go home, and now you can do it on your own. That's, to me, sounds like how Bet Yosef is reading the Kolbo. It may not be, flow with the actual lashon, the language of the Kolbo itself, but it sounds to me like that's how when Bet Yosef is paraphrasing the Kolbo, maybe that's what he may actually have had in mind your question, and for that reason maybe is trying to address that. Okay, so just moving along here. Basically, I kind of wanted to because I know we're running towards the end of the shiur. I wanted to just address one of the main points that I wanted to bring up, which is basically the question of making a Berakha Minhag. There's a Gemara in Sukkah that lays down a rule that basically whenever you have a Minhag, that different types of practices in Judaism. You have Torah obligations. I mean, these are obligations that come from the Torah, obviously. Then you have rabbinic obligations. You have You have takanot, which are decrees that the rabbis made, in order to create an obligation to do something. These are takanot that were created by either rabbis or batei din, rabbinical courts that established, affirmatively that people are obligated to fulfill certain obligations. These are rabbinic, takanot. Then you have what's called minhagim. Minhagim are customs, and customs could come about in one of two ways. Either you have rabbis that come along and say that, well, there's a good practice, there's a custom that may recall or enhance a person's observance in his Judaism, and therefore it's a good minhag to follow. Or a minhag can develop organically, where the people themselves started, taking upon themselves a good custom, and then it sort of caught on that once you have this good custom, and many people started doing it, so then it became a minhag. So those are two different ways in which minhag started. The Gemara in Sukkah takes up the minhag of beating the arava, basically you had the willow branch that was taken on Sukkot, and in the time of the Bet Midrash, they would surround the mizbeach with the willow branches, and they would there was very large willow branches that would almost reach over the mizbeach, which was very high, and they would also beat the aravot on the base of the mizbeach, and the question came up as well: is there an obligation to make a berakha, to make a blessing on this custom of beating the willow branch? Nowadays, of course, we don't have a Bet Midrash. We still have the custom of beating the willow branch. So, is there an obligation to make a berakha? So the Gemara concludes that, in fact, there is no there's no warranty. There's no warrant for a berakha. And in fact, anything which is only considered a minhag, it's not a takanat chachamim, it's only a minhag, does not take a berakha. The Rambam makes this clear. This is the Rambam. The Rambam says, "Kol davar shu minhag, afa pishu minhag neviimhu, kegon netilat arava b'shvi shel chag, ve'eno tzarek l'om minhag chachamim." Anything which is a minhag, even if it's a very, very old minhag that dates back to the time of the prophets, like taking the arava on the 7th day of Sukkot. And goes without saying, a minhag chachamim, kegon kriyat halel b'rosh chodashim, saying a berakha on halel on Rosh Chodesh, u'b'cholo shel bo'ed shel Pesach, and mevarchim alav. No berakha is to be said on such a practice. Why is that? Well, when you make a berakha, we say, you're blessing Hashem, Asher Kiddushanu, that He sanctified us with His mitzvot, and He commanded us to sow it such and such, to al netilat yadayim, right? Al netilat lulav, any birkat mitzvah that you fill in the blank. Basically, because we were commanded either by the Torah or by the Chachamim to fulfill this practice, so we have to preface that with the berakha. With the minhag, there is no such obligation that was imposed upon us because of a takanat chachamim. It was only minhag. So if it's only minhag, so then it doesn't make sense to say asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu. So how can we make a berakha minhag? That's the case. How is it possible you can make a berakha on lighting ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset? It's a very, very powerful question that a number of commentators dwelled upon. What I like to do is, let me see here. I want to make a suggestion. We're getting to the tail end of the shiur, but this is my own suggestion. I didn't see this really anywhere else, but I think it's based on sound reasoning. So I'll give the suggestion here. What I'd like to say is there's different types of berachot. There's a berakha which is what's called the Birkat Mitzvah, and Birkat Mitzvah basically a Berakha on a mitzvah. The Birkat Mitzvah usually consists of the text of Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu. It has its own properties. It has to be what's called over la'asiyatan. It has to be recited before the fulfillment of the mitzvah. If you fulfill the mitzvah, so then it's too late to make the Berakha because now the mitzvah is gone. So that's what's called Birkat Mitzvah. Then you have another category of mitzvah which is called Birkat HaNehenin. The Gemara says anybody who gains benefit from this world, below Berakha, without Berakha, ki'ilu mal. It's as if he's stealing from Hashem. So whenever we benefit from the world, so we also have to bless Hashem. So these are all types of blessings on food, on smells, right? All those types of berachot are what's called birkat hanehenin, berachot that are made on gaining benefit from this world. Then you have a whole category of berachot which is called birkat shevach. Birkat shevach are berachot that are made in praise of Hashem. So birkat shevach can mean anything like a shechianu is a birkat shevach. Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'gel hazamazeh. That God allowed me to arrive at this moment where now I'm able to fulfill a mitzvah, or then now I'm able to get a new car or a new home, or anything which I feel the impetus to praise Hashem over. So it's called a birkat shevach. Most of our tefillot contain birkot shevach. Basically, these are berachot of praise. What I'd like to suggest is that the beracha of on Ner Chanukah, and we make basically three berachot. You have Asher Kiddushanu Tzvanu La'alik Ner Shel Chanukah, or La'alik Ner Chanukah, different girsaot. Then you have She'asai Lisim Lavtenu B'Yom HaZman Hazeh, and then in the first time we also say Shechianu. But with that first beracha, Asher Kiddushanu Tzvanu La'alik Ner Shel Chanukah, even though it started out as a Birkat Mitzvah. And of course, if you're at home and you light Ner Chanukah and you forget to say the Berakha, then it's too late. Just like any Birkat Mitzvah, if you say it too late, then it's no good. It has to be over L'asiyatan. What happened was that when the institution of Ner Chanukah and the Bet Knesset came about, and as we saw from the Bet Yosef, paraphrasing the Kolbo, let's look at that lashon again. If he basically says, Tamach Eshku Kered lefarsem hanes bifnei kol ha'am u'sader ha'berachot lifnehem sheyesh bazeh pirsum gadol Hashem yitbarach. So he said, basically, what is the reason why we lighten the Bet Knesset? It's for pirsum hanes in front of everybody, and to order the berachot in front of them. Why? Because that is a big pirsum to Hashem. When we make these berachot. So what I'd like to suggest is when they transferred the custom of lighting Ner Chanukah from the home, and they said now you're obligated to light in the Bet Knesset. Now we have a minhag to light in the Bet Knesset. They transformed the beracha of Ner Chanukah. Sheki deshanu b'mitzvah la'alik Ner Chanukah from a birkat mitzvah to a birkat shevach. And now it's actually a birkat shevach, because if you look closely at his language, saying that the Berakha itself is ordering the berachot in front of everybody, itself is the shevach. When we make the blessings in front of everybody, that is the shevach. So you'll ask me, if that's the case, I mean, how could you reconcile the language Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu with a birkat shevach? That clearly indicates that it's a birkat mitzvah. How is that possible that you can make such a beracha and claim that it's a birkat shevach? So I'd like to give two examples of where that actually did happen, and maybe we'll end the class with these 2 points, and then I'll take any questions. The first example is the opinion of the Rosh and other Rishonim. Rabbeinu Asher, the Ritva also mentions this as well. The Berakha that we make upon betrothal, when a man gets engaged to a woman, so there's a Berakha, it's a very special Berakha, it's called Birkat Erusin. Nowadays, there was a time when the Chatan himself recited the Berakha. Nowadays, the what's called the Mesader Kiddushin, the person that's arranging for the wedding, the rabbi usually is the one that makes the Berakha. This is really kind of like what starts off the wedding. He says, "Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al harayot ve'asar lanu et ha'arusot v'yitir lanu tesuot lanu al yidei kuchav v'shirim." Wait a second. Listen carefully to the text of the Berakha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al harayot. So there you have the language asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, and the Rosh has a whole question about, well, let's say the betrothal, which is actually, when does the betrothal occur? It occurs when the Chatan gives the Kala an object of value and says, Hare'at mekudeshetli. Says, behold, your betrothal, you should use a ring. And he says, Hare'at mekudeshetli. Let's say the Chatan gives her the ring, he preempts the rabbi. He said, oh my gosh, I forgot. I gave her the ring already, but we didn't make the Berakha. What do we do? The Rosh says, don't worry about it. Why shouldn't we worry about it? Because he says, the Berakha Birkat Erusin is not really a Birkat Mitzvah. Don't be dissuaded by thinking, because you're saying Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvah, that it's a Birkat Mitzvah. It's really Birkat Shevach. It's a Birkat Shevach because basically we're praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu for separating us and basically making all other women, forbidden, and only that this woman is now permitted to me, right? So that's a shevach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and yet we see that the language Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvah is applied to Birkat Shevach. One other example I want to give is Birkat Torah. So we have 3 berachot that we make every morning on the mitzvah of learning Torah. We have to learn Torah every single day. We have to learn Torah every single day. And before we learn Torah, we have to make Berakha. What Berakha do we make? There's a 3-way machloket in the Sechet Berachot. Each opinion has its own version of the Berakha. The Gemara concludes, great, what we should do is we should make all 3 Berachot. One of the Berachot is Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvah v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, or according to the Ashkenazic Nusach, it's La'asok be'divrei Torah. And the question is, men are obligated to say this Berakha. What about women? Are women obligated to make Birkat Torah? So we conclude that yes, women are obligated to say Birkat Torah. Why are women obligated to make Birkat Torah? Indeed, women are not obligated in Talmud Torah. They're not obligated to learn Torah. So why do they make the Berakha of Al Divrei Torah? We know that. I'm not going to get into it. It was kind of like a sidetrack. So why are women obligated? So one answer is that women are obligated in the section of the Torah that they need to know in order to be able to fulfill the Torah. But women are obligated to fulfill many, many mitzvot. And in order to know how to fulfill them, they have to, of course, learn Torah. So since they have to learn Torah by de facto, as a result of being obligated to practice Torah, so then just like they're obligated to, just like men are obligated to learn Torah for its own sake, women are obligated to learn Torah for practice. So therefore, they said that women can make the Berakha on Birkot Torah. Another answer is offered by Rav Yitzchak Ze'ev Soloveitchik in the name of his father, of Chaim Soloveitchik, and he says, no, in fact, you're making a mistake. The Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvah al Torah is not a Birkat mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah on the activity of learning Torah. We have the Torah. We have the corpus of the Torah, and the corpus of the Torah in and of itself demands a Berakha. And that corpus of the Torah applies equally to men and women as well. And since the corpus of the Torah demands the Berakha, it's not really Birkat mitzvah of the activity of learning Torah. It's a Birkat Shevach of having a Torah to learn. Since the Birkat Shevach, so another example, just pointing out, of a Berakha, we say Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvah v'tzivanu, and yet it's considered, according to some, as Birkat Shevach. So this, by the same token, where we see these examples, what I'd like to suggest is that Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvah v'tzivanu le'alik ner shachanukah, the Bet Knesset, and the Bet Yosef, is really a Birkat Shevach, because really we're now having a publicizing the miracle in in the best form that we can in the Bet Knesset in front of everybody. And by doing so, now it's Birkat Shevach. Once it's a Birkat Shevach, it's much easier to understand why we're making the Berakha. It's not really Birkat Mitzvah. So that whole problem really kind of falls away at that point. So that's really my thesis of what I'd like to answer for why there's really no problem in making a Berakha on the Minhag of lighting in the Bet Knesset. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Chacham, for that very well presented and extensive shiur. If anyone has any questions, they can raise their hand or unmute or write in the chat box. Logistically, we have someone asking for a copy of the source sheet.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to share it. I can share it with Sina and he can
Awesome.
distribute it. Okay.
Perfect. We have a question from David, who says, if David's here, maybe he wants to ask his question. Okay, I'll ask it for him. Given that this is a minhag and I am not yotzeh the chiyuv to light my own menorah, should I answer amen when I hear the berakha?
If it's a minhag and you hear the Berakha in the Bet Knesset,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Is that based on what we're saying? It's a Birkat Shevach, so it's a perfectly 100% legitimate Berakha, and you should certainly say Amen. In fact, even if I would argue that even if you said Amen and tried to fulfill your obligation through the lighting, it wouldn't work. You would still have to go home and light on your own and make your own Berachot. Because the Berakha of Asher Kideshanu B'Nsav Sivanu La'alik Ner Shel Chanukah in the Bet Knesset is fundamentally different than Asher Kideshanu B'Nsav Sivanu La'alik Ner Shel Chanukah in the home. The nature of those two Berachot are separate.
Now, would you be able to touch on the minhag of Hallel on Rosh Chodesh? More over there, it's a
Very, very good question. Yes. Yeah, I'll just very briefly. So one of the sources that I didn't include in my sheet is a Rishon called the Rivash. Rivash was Yitzchak Bar Sheshet. So he was born in Barcelona in the 14th century, and moved to Zaragoza. And eventually, when things started getting bad in Spain in 1391, there was a terrible massacre. This was already the beginning of the forced conversions in Spain. So some people even claim that Yitzchak Bar Sheshet himself was forcibly converted. He was baptized. His family eventually fled Spain, and he made his way to Algeria and became the rabbi of the community in Algeria. He wrote a number of teshuvot, which is compiled in Shelot Shuvah Rivash. One of the teshuvot that he writes about is this very question about making a Berakha Minhag of lighting Ner Chanukah in the Bet Knesset. His answer is that there's two different types of minhagim. There's what's called a minhag, what he calls a minhag kal. It's like a light minhag, which is the example that he gives is beating the arava. And then he says that there's a minhag chamur, there's a more serious type of minhag, which he says lighting in the Bet Knesset. And the other example that he gives is making a Berakha on Rosh Chodesh, making a Berakha on Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. As we saw before in the source sheet, the Rambam says, in fact, openly, that Berakha should not be recited on Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, because Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is only minhag. But the Rivash says, no, wait, so that's a very special type of minhag. It's minhag chamur. Nowadays, there's a split among these Sephardic communities. The Sephardic communities, most Sephardic communities in Israel, and kind of like Yedot HaMizrach, Babylonian, Syrian, Egyptian, do not make Berakha on Hallel and Rosh Chodesh. Western Sephardim, Turkish, Moroccan, Spanish, Portuguese, do make a Berakha on Hallel and Rosh Chodesh. So they're actually following the opinion of the Rivash and those who the Knesset Agdolah is another important authority. He was from Turkey. He also says the same thing that just like we make a Berakha on Halal Rosh Chodesh, so too we should make Berakha on lighting Ner Chanukah on the Bet Knesset. So that answer is great for those Sephardim and Ashkenazim who have that practice. But for the Sephardim who don't, they can't really use that reasoning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any last questions? Okay, so we're gonna close it for tonight. If anyone has any questions, we have the chat, the WhatsApp chat, and I'll forward it to the Chacham. Also, the Chacham will send us the source sheet, so I'll distribute it to you guys there. Thank you everyone for being here. Chacham, thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you going forward many more times. And Laila Tov, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Be well.